The rain tapped insistently against the porch light, a steady rhythm that sounded almost like mocking applause as I stood there with nothing but a worn suitcase resting at my feet. The air smelled of wet earth and damp cedar, and each droplet seemed to settle heavily on my shoulders, pressing me down. Behind me, the heavy oak door closed with a decisive thud, and then came the slow, deliberate slide of the lock. It echoed in my chest like a gavel, like a final verdict handed down without appeal. Her words, sharp, calculated, cruel, still rang in my ears as if they had been etched into the rain itself. "You do not live here anymore. This house is mine now. Go find somewhere else to haunt." My daughter-in-law, Bianca, had not raised her voice, but she didn't need to. Every syllable struck like cold steel. I could still see her lips curled in satisfaction, her hand on the doorframe, her eyes glinting with something that was not grief but triumph. I did not argue. At 67, I had learned that silence could often wield more power than the loudest protest. Words are cheap when hurled in anger. Silence, though, lingers like a shadow. And so I stood tall, my back straight though my heart ached, the drizzle soaking into the wool of my coat. The rain slid down my cheeks, mingling with the salt of my tears, though I refused to let her see them fall. Instead, I looked up at the house that had once been my refuge, my pride, my son's masterpiece. Every stone, every beam, every nail driven into the bones of that home had been chosen with care. Andrew and I had built it together, not just with hands and money, but with the years of shared sacrifice, late nights, and dreams that refused to die. And now it belonged to someone who looked at it only as a prize, a possession, a crown jewel in her collection of victories. She thought she had won. She thought I was nothing but a ghost clinging to the past, finally pushed out into the storm. But Bianca never knew my son the way I did. She never understood that Andrew was not a man who played life like a simple game of chance. No, Andrew loved puzzles. He thrived on strategy, building systems that appeared ordinary on the surface, systems that lured you into underestimating them, until the brilliance unfolded in ways you could never predict. That was his gift. That was his legacy. As the rain streamed across my face, and my suitcase grew heavier with water, I heard his voice in my mind as clearly as if he were standing beside me again. It was one of those quiet evenings, years ago, when the house hummed with the low whir of his servers, and I sat by him with a book while he typed. "Trust the system I built, Mom," he had said, his eyes glinting with that fire of certainty he carried even in his darkest days. I hadn't understood then, not completely, but standing there abandoned on my own doorstep, I realized something with bone-deep clarity. His final plan was only beginning. My name is Evelyn Carter. For most of my life, I was no one extraordinary, just a school librarian in Maple Ridge, Washington, a quiet town where gossip traveled faster than the rain. I spent 35 years among shelves of books, helping children discover their voices in stories, maintaining the soft order of the library, with its steady hum of turning pages and whispers. My life had been steady, modest, predictable. And then Andrew was born. My son filled that ordinary life with extraordinary light, with dreams too vast to fit inside our small town. He was only 12 when he began tinkering with discarded computers in our basement. While other boys spent their afternoons chasing baseballs down dusty fields, Andrew stacked metal parts like puzzle pieces, scribbled lines of code into notebooks, and asked me for extension cords as though they were gold. I remember the nights most vividly, the way the basement smelled faintly of solder and old carpet, the glow of the monitor casting his face in blue light. I brewed pot after pot of coffee just to keep myself awake so I could sit beside him, my hands busy labeling cardboard boxes of wires and chips as if they were library books. I never fully grasped the mechanics of what he was building, but I understood him. His curiosity was endless, his mind a labyrinth that never ceased to find another path forward. By the time he turned 20, Andrew had launched his first startup. It was little more than a dream propped up by 2 refurbished servers humming in our garage, and a fire in his heart that refused to dim. I watched him pace our tiny kitchen night after night, rehearsing investor pitches in front of me, while I pressed his shirts and reminded him between sentences to eat something, anything. One evening, as I folded a napkin, he paused and said, "Mom, every great system starts with trust." He looked at me with that unwavering certainty I had seen since boyhood, and I knew he wasn't just talking about machines. He was asking me to trust him, and I did, completely. Every late night, every risk, every dollar I had saved from years of librarian's wages, I poured into Andrew's future, not because I understood every line of his code, but because I understood his heart. And then, just like that, everything ended. The morning after Andrew's funeral, silence pressed against the house like a weight too heavy to bear. But it wasn't the gentle hush of grief, the kind that allows memories to drift softly through the rooms. No, this was a brittle, sharp quiet, the kind of silence that feels ready to shatter with the smallest breath, leaving shards in your skin. I sat in the living room, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes fixed on the armchair where Andrew used to sit with his late-night books. I could still see him there, his long legs crossed, his brow furrowed in concentration, the faintest smile tugging at his lips when he found something brilliant on the page. Everywhere I turned, he was still here in the sunlight falling across the oak floorboards we had polished together, in the faint hum of the servers he had wired into the walls downstairs, in the scent of coffee that lingered no matter how often I scrubbed the counters. And then heels, the sound of them clicking against the staircase like a metronome. Sharp, deliberate, unyielding. Bianca appeared at the top of the stairs, descending like a queen addressing her subject. She did not wear black, nor gray, nor anything that whispered of mourning. Instead, she wore a cream-colored business suit, pressed and pristine, her hair swept into a flawless twist, her makeup sculpted sharp as a blade. She did not pause to look at me. She did not nod, or offer a word of acknowledgement. Instead, she lifted her phone to her ear, her voice crisp, controlled, utterly detached, as though she were managing a deal, not stepping into the home of a man newly buried. I remember the scent of her perfume as though it were a photograph burned into my memory. Sweet, floral, the kind you find in department store displays, too loud for a room that had just held a funeral. It trailed behind her as she moved past me, and for a breath I felt less like Andrew's mother, and more like an old chair someone hadn't yet thrown out. That small domestic cruelty, the way she made me invisible with a single practiced waft, told me everything I needed to know. This was not just a moment of grafted grief, it was the opening act of something much larger. Bianca's ambition wasn't merely awake, it was in full bloom. 2 days later I sat opposite her, in the polished mahogany conference room of Martin Whitaker, Andrew's longtime attorney. Martin's office smelled of leather, lemon oil, and the dry, papery hush of documents stacked with careful hands. The shelves behind him were lined with row upon row of law books and binders. They looked like my own library's spine-lined order, only colder. Martin, with his thinning hair and the slow, measured way he adjusted his glasses, had known Andrew since college. He had watched the boy with the soldering iron become a man who built systems other people trusted without question. He cleared his throat, folded the will over, as if between the pages there might be mercy, and began to read. Legal language is a thicket of phrases that trip the ear with their neutrality, but the meaning cut clean through the air. Controlling shares, everything over $50 million in value, would pass to Bianca Reed Carter. Investments, accounts, cars, artwork, the house itself, all named, all hers. My name appeared once, like an afterthought inscribed in a dry footnote. To my mother, Evelyn Carter, I leave my deepest gratitude for her guidance and love. That was it. A polite line of thanks where a son might have written instructions, protections, or a single word more. The phrase landed on my chest and sat there heavy and ridiculous. Money had never been my measure of worth, and yet I felt erased. My life, years of careful thrift, the savings I had carried like a secret lamp into Andrew's endeavors, was reduced to a 2-sentence kindness in a legal document, read with a neutral tone. My cheeks burned. I could sense the blood in my ears, and the conference room seemed to tilt just slightly, a room unmoored from the solid world I had trusted. Across the table, Bianca remained composed, her posture as immaculate as the cut of her suit. Her hands were folded in front of her, delicate as a catalog model's, and for a moment the corner of her mouth hinted at a smile. Small, private, triumphant. I could feel the smile as though it were aimed at me alone, a tiny spear. Her phone lay face up on the table, and when Martin finished, she tapped it a single time, eyes sweeping the room as if counting the trophies she'd claimed. I watched her and remembered Andrew in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, his first business plan, scrawled on lined paper, the check I had written with hands that didn't tremble at the time, because hope made them steady. It's not a risk, I'd told him then. It's an investment in you. Now that investment sat in a room under the control of a woman who would arrange my son's life into tidy, profitable rows and leave me with a single polite sentence. When we returned to the house, the thin veneer of civility that had somehow kept the two of us from immediate war dissolved, like sugar in tea. Bianca moved through the rooms with the efficiency of someone conducting an appraisal before demolition. She inspected everything with a professional's eye. Nothing sentimental, nothing uncertain. Her fingertips brushed across the frames of family photographs, as if she were testing the glass for cracks. There I was, in many of them, fatigued and alive, smiling with Andrew on fishing trips, years etched into the corners. She met each image with the same blank assessment, useful or not. All of this has to go, she said flatly, and her voice slid through the house like a blade. We need a clean, modern aesthetic. She paused in Andrew's library, running one long finger across the spines of his beloved science fiction novels. These were not mere paper and glue, they were the map of his mind. First editions, dog-eared copies he'd annotated in college, volumes given by friends and by me for birthdays. These books had been his constellation. When she declared, "These can be sold," they might fetch something. The words were simple, economic, and wholly corrosive. Her phone rang then, and she answered without a glance, speaking into the receiver as if ticking items off a ledger. "Yes, it's all confirmed. 55 million, not including the property. I have complete control now." She looked at me as she spoke, and I felt the challenge in her eyes like a provocation. A dare. If grief had been a fragile rawness, Bianca's presence turned it into a living instrument. That afternoon, while the movers walked through the house planning routes and measuring windows, I wandered the rooms like a woman leaving her own skin. I touched the banister where Andrew had scarred the oak as a boy, ran my fingers along the windowsill, where he used to arrange his gadgets in a precise, proud row, and paused at the servers in the basement, his humming, faithful machines that had once been his secret orchestra. I lingered there longer than propriety allowed, standing with my palm near the cool metal, feeling the faint vibration that still carried the memory of his tireless nights. Something about the will gnawed at me. Andrew knew how to protect what mattered. He had always been meticulous, an engineer of contingencies. When he'd explained projects to me, he spoke in structures and safeguards, in redundancies that read like prayers against failure. "Trust the system I built, Mom," he had said. I tried to remember everything he ever taught me, even the things he thought were too small to matter. He had mapped fail-safes into code, tucked keys into odd places, left breadcrumbs in comments that only he would understand. Why then, if he was as careful as he'd lived, would he hand over the keys without instruction? Why would a man who built traps for complacency leave his mother to the mercy of a phrase? Suspicion is an ugly flower. It blooms when you are wounded. In the quiet that followed the mover's tape and muffled footsteps, it unfurled in me steady and slow. I began to look at the house as not merely a home, but as a ledger, a machine with components that could be inspected, adjusted, and if necessary, reclaimed. My grief tempered into something else, something sharper. I started to catalog what could not be sold. The photograph albums with the dates penciled inside, the small carved box Andrew had given me for my birthday, when he was 11, the old brass key on a faded ribbon he'd once used in a school play, and then never thrown away. I could imagine Bianca signing away the home's warmth with a pen and a smile, but there were parts of Andrew she could not liquidate because he had hidden them where paper law could not reach. When night fell and the house finally quieted, I sat at the kitchen table where so many of our plans had been hatched. The lamp threw a small circle of light onto the wood. Outside, the rain had started again, a steady wash that erased footprints and softened edges. I opened an old shoebox, the one Andrew had once used to hide a stack of handwritten notes for me when he wanted to surprise me, and let my fingers sift through his folded paper like through autumn leaves. There it was. A page of his handwriting, not intended as a letter but as a set of instructions, his code disguised as a kitchen list. If something happens to me, one line read between a grocery item and a scribbled phone number. Look where the maps hide. Maps. The word pulsed in my mind like Morse code. I felt a little of the old hope bubble up, the same stubborn light that had once made me write a check and trust a young man with an idea. Andrew had never left me nothing. He had never been that careless. His will, whatever its dry lines, was not the whole of his voice. Somewhere between his servers and his stacks of books, between the label of his favorite jacket and the dent in the banister, he had left me more than gratitude on a single line. The system he believed in, the one he had asked me to trust, had not been only for his business. It was for his life, and for the parts of it he could not bear to fold into a final accounting. So I started to plan, not in the fevered way of revenge I had once read about in novels, but as Andrew had taught me to approach problems, methodically, patiently, with a mind for leverage and a readiness to wait for the right moment. Bianca thought she had cleared the board. She thought she had the pieces lined up and the game settled. She did not know how carefully Andrew had arranged his pieces, or that his mother, alone and underestimated, still remembered how to read a map. 2 days later, the storm Bianca had promised arrived, not in thunder or lightning, but in the form of 2 men who looked as if they'd been carved out of stone and muscle. They filled the doorway behind her, broad-shouldered and unspeaking, their expressions the vacant neutrality of men paid to lift and obey. Bianca's heels clicked across the polished floor as she swept into Andrew's library, a room that had once pulsed with his energy, alive with the quiet hum of servers and the scent of books. She didn't pause to take in the rows of spines, the annotations in the margins, or the framed photographs Andrew had insisted on keeping close by. Instead, she gestured with one manicured hand, her voice crisp and commanding. "This room is depressing," she declared, as though she were the final authority on what beauty meant. "All this dark wood and paper junk. Clear it out by tomorrow. The gym equipment is coming Friday." I had been sitting in the corner chair, one of Andrew's books balanced in my lap, tracing the notes he had scribbled in the margins years earlier. When one of the men reached for it, I closed the cover gently, set it back onto the shelf, and rose to my feet. My voice was steady, though my chest burned. "Bianca," I said quietly, but firmly, "this isn't junk. This was Andrew's sanctuary. Every piece in this room mattered to him." Her answer was a laugh, short, sharp, and bitter enough to leave a metallic taste in my mouth. "Memories do not pay bills," she spat, her smile twisting into something cruel. Then she tilted her head toward me, her eyes glinting with the satisfaction of conquest. "Evelyn, you're not welcome here anymore. Go find a dumpster to haunt." With a curt nod, she summoned the men forward. They didn't need to touch me to move me. Their sheer presence guided me toward the door, like cattle herded from a pen. My suitcase was already waiting outside on the lawn, damp from the drizzle, standing like an accusation of my failure to belong. I turned once, placing my hand on the frame of the doorway, but before I could breathe in the scent of my son's home, one last time, the lock clicked behind me. That sound, so small and final, was enough to make my knees weaken, and just like that, I was erased. Erased not only from my son's house, but from the life I had poured into its walls. The rain came harder, running down my collar, soaking into my wool coat, until the weight of it pressed against me like grief itself. I didn't allow myself the indulgence of looking back. To turn would have been to give Bianca the satisfaction of seeing me cling. Instead, I kept my head high, the suitcase handle biting into my palm, and walked into the street. A taxi idled at the corner, its headlights hazy in the mist. I waved it down and climbed inside, the cracked vinyl seat groaning beneath me. As we pulled away, I watched the manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges of the suburbs slide past, neat rows of artificial order blurring through raindrops on the window. Beyond them came strip malls with half-lit signs and tired parking lots, then the low stretch of warehouses and industrial yards, where the city's skeleton showed through. "Drop me at the Northwa Motel," I told the driver. My voice sounded distant, as though I were listening to someone else speak. The name tasted old in my mouth. I remembered it from years ago, back when Andrew and I had driven past during one of his early business trips. A place quiet enough to vanish in, anonymous enough for no one to ask questions. The neon sign buzzed when we arrived, half the letters dim, leaving the word Northwam glowing like some unfinished thought. The motel's corridor smelled faintly of stale smoke buried beneath sharp cleaning solution, a mixture that clung to the walls no matter how often it was scrubbed. The room they gave me was square and unremarkable. A brown bedspread stretched across a sagging mattress, a single lamp casting weak yellow light, and a humming ice machine just outside that punctuated the night with its uneven rhythm. I set my suitcase on the metal rack by the door, its zipper still wet from the rain, and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. For the first time in days, no one was watching, no one was pushing me out, no one was circling the house like a predator searching for valuables. The silence here was not brittle like Bianca's version of grief, nor heavy like the hush after the funeral. It was open, empty, and for the first time, it gave me room to think. I clasped my hands together, staring at the blank wall. Bianca's cruelty had been swift, decisive, a knife without hesitation, but Andrew had never been careless. My son had been a planner, a builder of hidden paths and layered defenses. Bianca may have believed she had claimed everything, but deep inside me I knew Andrew wouldn't have left his sanctuary so exposed. Somewhere, woven into the fabric of his life, he had left me something more, and in that quiet motel room, with the rain still whispering against the window, I began to wonder if losing the house was not the end of my story, but the start of Andrew's final system unfolding. He built firewalls and backups for everything. Andrew was not just cautious in business, he was meticulous in every corner of his life. Could it really be that in his personal affairs, in the matters that meant the most, he had left nothing behind? The very thought gnawed at me like a loose thread I could not stop pulling. My son was brilliant, disciplined, and wary of the unpredictable currents of the world. He never left loose ends. The idea that he would entrust everything to Bianca, a woman who saw books as junk and memories as clutter, simply did not sit right with me. No, something deeper, something deliberate was hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. I found myself drifting back to the last serious conversation Andrew and I had shared in the library, just a month before illness began to sink its claws into him. The memory unfolded in slow detail, the golden lamp spilling soft light across his desk, the faint ticking of the antique clock, the scent of old leather and paper that always lingered in that room. He had looked up from his laptop, his face pale with fatigue, yet his eyes burned steady, sharp as ever. "If something ever happens to me, Mom," he had said, voice firm despite the weakness I could hear at the edges, "trust the system I built." At the time, I smiled through my worry and assumed he meant his company, his empire of networks and servers, the digital fortress he had spent his life creating. But now, sitting in that dim, sagging motel room with the hum of the ice machine outside, and the loneliness pressing in on me like a heavy curtain, I began to suspect he meant something else, something far larger, something meant for me. My hands, restless, searched for a pen. I found one by the faded motel notepad, cheap plastic, the kind meant to be thrown away. Instead, I flipped a crumpled receipt over, and with slow deliberate strokes, scrawled 2 words, "Call Whitaker." The ink bled slightly on the paper, and I stared at the words as if they carried weight far heavier than their syllables. Martin Whitaker had been Andrew's lawyer for years, discreet and loyal, the kind of man who measured his words like a craftsman choosing his tools. If anyone knew whether Andrew had left a key hidden behind Bianca's smug wall of control, it would be him. The next evening, after pacing the threadbare carpet until my legs ached and my feet felt raw, I finally gathered the nerve to act. The silence of the motel pressed in on me, punctuated only by the low hum of a vending machine down the hall, and the occasional muffled cough from the neighboring room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sagging beneath me, and stared at the phone on the nightstand. My fingers hovered above the buttons, trembling with hesitation. What role was I about to step into? Was I calling as a grieving mother desperate for scraps of comfort, or as a woman ready to reclaim her dignity, to fight back against the cruelty that had shoved her into the cold? I pressed the button and listened. The dial tone stretched thin, each ring a heartbeat in my ears. Then, at last, a voice, a familiar one, warm yet edged with restraint. "Evelyn," Martin said, his tone carrying both relief and concern in equal measure. "I was about to call you." Those words struck me like a shiver down my spine. He had been waiting, not merely available, not simply reachable, but waiting, as if Andrew himself had drawn a path that led me here to this moment. My breath caught in my throat. Martin lowered his voice, almost conspiratorial. "I could not tell you this until certain conditions were met," he said carefully. "Now they have been." I clutched the receiver tighter, my knuckles whitening, my pulse beginning to steady for the first time since the funeral. "Conditions?" I asked, my voice low. "Yes," he continued. "The will Bianca heard, the one she believes is the final word, that was only the first layer. Andrew, he was too wise to put all his faith in a single sheet of paper. The real plan contained a contingency clause. For 30 days Bianca was entrusted with fiduciary duty, a legal obligation to protect both the family's welfare and the Carter legacy. Expelling you from the home, dismissing you like trash, that act was not only cruel, it was a direct violation of the trust Andrew placed in her. And that violation triggered the next stage. There was silence then, a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity, broken only by the faint static on the line. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, every nerve alive. Martin's voice softened, deliberate. "Your son anticipated this. He wanted to give her a chance, Evelyn. He wanted to believe she might rise above her nature, but he also prepared for the likelihood of her greed. By forcing you out, Bianca fulfilled the very condition that allows me to open the sealed documents." A tremor passed through me, not fear this time, but something close to relief. I sat straighter, my heart steadying, my spine lengthening with the first taste of strength I had felt since Andrew's funeral. My son had not abandoned me. He had not left me erased. He had left me a shield, and now, Martin said, the weight of his words falling carefully into place, "It is time to follow Andrew's true instructions." I did not answer immediately. My mind was a storm of memory, grief, and possibility. Martin must have sensed my hesitation, because he slowed down, his tone shifting into something almost fatherly patient. "Evelyn," he said gently, "fiduciary duty sounds like a heavy legal phrase, but at its heart it's really very simple. Think of it this way, if you ask a neighbor to watch your dog while you are away, they have one job: to care for that dog as if it were their own. They cannot sell the leash, neglect its food, or lock the poor thing outside. That would be a betrayal of trust. That, Evelyn, is what Bianca has done. And because she betrayed Andrew's trust, we now have the grounds to act." His analogy hung in the air, plain yet piercing. Betrayal of trust, that was Bianca's true crime. And Andrew, my Andrew, had foreseen it all. I nodded, even though he could not see me. The gesture was instinctive, a small anchor for my spiraling thoughts. As a librarian by trade, I had always loved examples that made complex things clear. For decades I had lived among words and metaphors, each one a door into understanding. And here Martin had handed me a key in the simplest form possible: a dog and a promise. In Andrew's will, Martin continued, his voice steady as a metronome, the dog is the Carter family legacy. That means the people, the home, the history, all of it. Not just the money, but the marrow of what Andrew built and protected. I closed my eyes as his words sank in, dawning in slow waves like a tide, pulling back to reveal a hidden shoreline. It was a test. Andrew had not only set Bianca a task, he had measured her character. For 30 days, she was entrusted to guard not only the assets but the spirit of the Carter family, to prove herself as a worthy steward. And she had not merely failed, she had detonated her failure in the most dramatic way possible by throwing me out. She had exiled the very heart of what Andrew had built. My throat felt tight, my voice emerging as little more than a whisper. So what happens now? Martin's answer was firm, deliberate. Now, he said, the breach gives me legal authority to activate Andrew's sealed causal, the contingency he prepared for this exact outcome. The next steps will not be loud or dramatic. They will be quiet, procedural, and precise. But make no mistake, Evelyn, they will change everything. I opened my eyes, staring at the pale motel wall as his words unfurled like a banner across my mind. For the first time in weeks I began to feel something that resembled hope, not the fragile, flickering kind that dies with disappointment, but a deeper, steadier pulse, like a drumbeat in my chest. Martin's tone shifted, becoming more deliberate, almost like a professor guiding a student through a complex lesson. Andrew left instructions. I've rehearsed them many times. The first step, he said, is to create space. We do that through procedural holds. I pictured him at his desk, papers spread out, pen poised like a surgeon's scalpel. His words conjured images of gears slowly turning in some hidden machine. We'll file routine requests, asset valuations, probate filings, tax assessments, and temporary injunctions, he explained. On paper, it will look like nothing unusual, just the slow, boring machinery of state law grinding away. But in practice, his voice took on a quiet edge. In practice, it will build an invisible wall around the $55 million Bianca thinks she controls. My breath caught. 55 million. The number felt almost abstract, yet it was the weight of my son's life's work, the fortress he had built. She will see the money, Martin said softly, but she will not be able to touch it. Imagine a banquet table behind a glass wall. She can press her face against it. She can smell the food. She can even fantasize about the taste, but she cannot take a single bite. The image struck me so vividly that I could almost see Bianca's perfectly manicured hands flattening against the glass, her sharp nails clicking like insect legs as she stared at what she believed was hers. Martin's tone shifted again. Grave now. Your role, he reminded me, is even harder. You must disappear. No visits to friends, no phone calls, no visible movements. She must believe she has succeeded in erasing you. That false confidence will make her reckless, and when she is reckless, she will leave footprints we can follow. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the weak lamp casting a pale circle of light across the threadbare carpet. Just days ago, this room had felt like a prison of humiliation, a place of exile, where rain-soaked coats and silence pressed down like a weight. Now, as Martin spoke, I realized it was something else entirely. This was not my cell, it was my command center. I glanced around the small space with new eyes, the scuffed dresser, the sagging mattress, the hum of the ice machine outside. These were no longer signs of defeat, they were the camouflage of my next move. Silence and patience would be my weapons now, my armor against Bianca's arrogance. Andrew's system had been activated, and my only task was to trust it, to trust him. While I kept to the shadows of the North Motel, becoming a ghost in the periphery of my own life, Bianca stepped fully into the spotlight. She believed she had won. She believed she had erased me. And that, Martin had said, was exactly what we needed. Martin's investigator later told me that Bianca moved through the city in a blur of consumption, as if money were oxygen and she had been starved for years. It wasn't living, not even indulgence. It was hunger, voracious and endless, a need to devour everything within reach. Her first stop had been the boutiques downtown, the kind of glittering storefronts where I had once walked past quietly, admiring from the outside, but never daring to step in. Bianca didn't browse or hesitate. She pointed like a general commanding her army, handbags with five-figure price tags, watches that cost more than the house I raised Andrew in, racks of designer dresses she would likely never wear twice. Store clerks, seasoned in catering to the wealthy, later described her not as a shopper, but as a conqueror, collecting tribute from a world that had finally bent to her will. From there she drifted into a luxury car showroom, her heels clicking across polished marble floors. The salesmen's eyes lit up when they saw her. Wealth radiated off her like perfume. The blood-red sports car, with doors that lifted like wings, caught her attention. I could almost picture her standing there, one manicured hand grazing the glossy surface, already imagining herself behind the wheel, hair whipping in the wind as she sped away from the life she once despised. She placed a large, non-refundable deposit with a careless flick of her card. When the salesman asked about completing the balance, she laughed lightly, airy and dismissive. "As soon as the estate paperwork clears," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. She believed herself untouchable, the queen of an empire that could never be challenged. Back at Andrew's home, the house that still smelled faintly of lemon polish and inked paper, she toured the rooms with a well-known interior designer, issuing commands as if she were royalty inspecting her castle. The oak floors Andrew and I had chosen together, polished until they gleamed like honey, were to be ripped out and replaced with cold white marble. The sturdy furniture we had picked for comfort, family gatherings, and nights of conversation, was to be replaced with chrome and glass, pieces that looked more like museum displays than living room chairs. When she reached Andrew's library, my son's sanctuary, she wrinkled her nose as though she had caught a whiff of rot. "This is a morgue," she said flatly, and snapped her fingers. "Got it. Clear it." She was rewriting her life in fast, sweeping strokes, erasing everything that had come before, as if history were an inconvenience. In her mind, her kingdom had been secured. Her throne was unshakable, but Andrew's system had already begun its work, and the cracks in her empire appeared quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. It began with something small, almost laughably ordinary. One bright morning, she arrived at a chic cafe downtown, dressed in a new designer coat, eager to be seen in the full bloom of her wealth. She ordered an elaborate Latin pastry and a coffee crafted like art, then handed over her sleek black card, the one tied directly to Andrew's estate. The barista swiped it once. Declined. He frowned, tried again, declined. Hakan's laugh rang out, sharp and brittle, pitched too high for the room. "That's impossible," she said, her voice just a little too loud. She pulled out a second card, impatient, her hand shaking, declined as well. The cafe had grown quiet. Patrons glanced sideways, trying not to stare, while Bianca's cheeks flushed beneath her perfect makeup. Flustered, she threw down a few bills of cash, snatched her coffee, and stormed outside, dialing the bank with quick, furious jabs of her manicured finger. The banker's tone was polite, almost soothing, as if he had delivered the same explanation countless times before. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, I see the issue. A temporary procedural hold has been placed on all estate accounts. It's standard practice during probate. Nothing unusual." To Bianca, those words must have felt like chains snapping shut. When she returned home, her interior designer was waiting, irritation in his clipped voice. The demolition crew was turned away by a legal injunction. "We're billing by the hour, Bianca. What is happening?" That same afternoon, her phone chimed with another message, this time from the car dealer. Her 72-hour window to complete payment had expired. The red sports car, The one she had already claimed in her mind was gone, sold to another, her deposit forfeited. Each door she pushed against, held firm, immovable. Each attempt to spread her wings ended with her colliding against glass walls she could not see, but Andrew had long ago designed. One by one, the walls of his quiet system closed in, leaving her stranded in a cage of her own arrogance. 5 days later, Martin called me at the motel. His voice, calm but resolute, carried a note of finality. "It's time," he said simply. I dressed with care that morning, pulling on the best navy suit I owned, the one Andrew himself had chosen for me on his wedding day. The fabric was worn but dignified, holding memories in every thread. In the waiting room of Martin's office, I sat with a book open in my lap. My hands were steady now, my breath even. For the first time since Andrew's funeral, I felt no fear, only resolve. The door opened, and Bianca stepped inside. I almost did not recognize her. Her once polished appearance was frayed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes rimmed with shadows. A faint tremor betrayed the weight of her unraveling world. She froze when she saw me, as though I were an apparition. Confusion rippled across her face, followed by shock, and then raw, unguarded fear. In the conference room, Martin began without ceremony. His voice was steady, the words sharp enough to carve the air.